continuing the second part of my story. She was silent for just a few seconds, then let out a bitter laugh. Fine. So now I'm a stranger, huh? I answered calmly. You earned that the day you began treating me like an ATM. There was a thud. She had smashed her phone against something. Then, as if the dam had finally broken, she exploded. You think you're better than everyone, don't you? That trust isn't just yours. You lived off Dad's money your whole life, and now you want to keep it all just because you divorced? There it is, the truth. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wanted balance, an inheritance, control. I tapped the screen to bring up the recording overlay. My tone stayed measured, each word intentional. Samantha, you know this call is being recorded, right? I'll send it to my legal team as evidence in my request for a no-contact order. Silence. Then I heard her composure crumble. She started to sob a full-bodied, guttural cry. I can't take it anymore. How can you be so cruel? Don't you remember that night I had a fever and you didn't sleep, sitting by my bed the whole time? Doesn't any of that matter? I took a deep, steadying breath. I remember, I said softly. I remember not drinking a drop of water that night for fear you might wake and not see me. I remember when you were 6 and said you would buy me a house when you were grown. At 10, you promised to take me to Hawaii. But I also remember how you told me it was shameful to be a housewife. You asked me not to come to parent-teacher meetings. You said I was useless, that I couldn't help with homework, that I didn't earn money and didn't deserve respect. She shouted down the line. So you're interrupting me for that? Would you give it all up for this? My voice dropped to a cold, clear whisper. No, I'm leaving you because you use the love I gave you as leverage. You treat affection as currency. I can forgive immaturity, Samantha, but I will not be emotionally extorted. Then I ended the call. I opened her contact and blocked her on every platform. I set her profile so she couldn't re-add me. I didn't leave even a goodbye. That night I opened the fridge and saw the jar of pickles I had prepared the day before. I had made them thinking she might come to the door apologizing one last time. I took the jar to the trash and threw it in. I kept nothing, not even the hope that she would return. Amanda, your husband made his move. I had just poured my morning coffee when Giader, my lawyer, told me on the phone. Zach filed a petition. He wants to claim part of your trust fund. He pauses, and then adds, he argues that the money your mother gave you was transferred during the marriage and so should be considered marital property. I let out a quiet laugh. Of course he would. And of course, he would stoop that low. But here's the truth. My mother's money was transferred after I moved out, after I had legally separated from Zach. She didn't give it to me as a wedding present. It wasn't a long-term joint investment. She sent it 2 months ago when she saw me at my lowest. She didn't even explain, she simply sent the funds with a note in the transaction description. For my daughter's life. Not refundable. It was clean, timed, documented. And now Zach wanted to twist that timeline, trying to present it as joint property simply because we weren't legally divorced yet. I said nothing. I just scanned the supposed package of evidence his lawyer had presented. Incredible. Not even the phrase, thick skin, could describe it. His petition claimed that although the funds came from the petitioner's mother-in-law, the transfer occurred during the legal marriage. Therefore, both parties had theoretical access and shared rights. Then, in a final audacious gesture, he added, I have no objection to these funds being used to support the family and the future needs of our daughter. Ah, so that's what it's about. Supporting the family? Or funding her next personal growth trip? Jeter and I got to work. We filed all the documents. The transfer date 2 weeks after I had moved out and officially separated from Zach. The receiving account newly created and only in my name. Zach had no access and no prior knowledge. Most importantly, the message my mother sent on the day she transferred the funds was still on my phone. Don't give him a cent. This was the first time in your life you could spend money on yourself. It wasn't a financial dispute. Finally, Zach showed his cards. He wasn't afraid of divorce, but he was terrified of losing control over me and the money. On the day of the hearing, he appeared in the same gray suit he'd worn a dozen times during our marriage. Back then, he used it to marry me. Now he wore it to try to take everything he could. He stood up, trying to seem reasonable. I only want clarity about marital assets. Don't we both have a responsibility to our daughter? Geeter stood and opened his folder. His voice was cold and firm. First, these funds were a personal gift from Amanda Michi's mother, intended exclusively for her use. Second, the transfer occurred after legal separation. Mr. Michi did not participate in the management of those funds. Third, Mr. Michi has engaged in multiple financial irregularities, including loans and unauthorized transfers, which compromised the marital financial trust. We have documentation to support this. He slid the evidence across the table. Screenshots of the bank transfer, the transaction note, The original text from my mother. And best of all, a copy of the loan documents Zach had asked me to sign quickly once, thinking I wouldn't read the fine print. I heard Zach exhale sharply from the other side of the table. He hadn't expected this. He didn't expect me to keep the receipts. He never thought those little slips he once shoved across the table would appear in court as key evidence against him. The judge, a woman in her 40s with a penetrating gaze, was not amused. After skimming everything, she looked up and gave her decision in a concise line. It is clear these funds were a personal gift made after the separation by Amanda Mitchie's mother. Mr. Mitchie has no legal right to them. Do you hear that? She said with professional grace. But the message was clear. Zach, don't touch my money. Outside the courthouse, Jaider handed me a coffee while we sat on the stone steps watching Zach talk to his nervous lawyer. She smiled. Do you know what he's really afraid of? I took a sip. Enlighten me. He's not afraid of ruin. He's afraid of you. He's afraid that you can now spend money without asking his permission. I laughed quietly. No, I said. What he fears most isn't divorce. It's the fact that I left and I'm better off without him. I looked at the court document in my hand. At the top it said, Petition for divorce, filed officially. And those 5 simple printed words comforted me more than any promise he had ever made. The day I walked out of that courtroom, I didn't go back home. Instead, I stopped by the city library and filled out a volunteer application. I had always dreamed of helping people find what they needed, recommending books, solving problems that piled up on a single sheet. Back then, Zach had laughed. How much are they going to pay you for that? Better stay home with Samantha. So I let go of the dream. But now? Now I live only for myself. I thought it was time to try the life I once imagined. 3 days later, I was sitting at the volunteer desk by the main window of the library, greeting my first visitor, an older woman who asked how to print her Social Security application. I guided her through the steps, helped her navigate the government site, showed her how to flag fraudulent numbers and print her medication interaction list. As she left, she squeezed my hand and said, You're more patient than my own daughter. I smiled. I said nothing. I'd heard those words before, only this time they counted. This time I had earned them on my own terms. On the way home, I stopped at the bank near the little park on Main Street. An older woman passed with her walker. She looked at me and then at the lunch container I was carrying. Eating alone? I nodded. She nodded too. I divorced at 60. I lived alone and ate alone for 20 years, and the meals got better and better. I couldn't help but laugh. Weren't you afraid? She looked me straight in the eye with a steel smile. Of course I was. But being afraid is better than living with a man who sees you as his helper. I didn't know her name. She didn't know my story. But for a while we sat there, 2 old pieces of iron warmed slowly by the same sun. That night I received an email from Zach. One line, Samantha is falling apart. She says your divorce is destroying her emotionally. I didn't reply. I didn't open the attachments. I already knew what he was doing, trying to make me feel guilty into submission. But I had learned something. Not every child deserves forgiveness. The day Zach disappeared from social media, I knew he had finally accepted defeat. But what he didn't expect were how many other defeats awaited him. Without his carefully curated image, the polite greetings at church stopped. People who once smiled now turned away. Social warmth? Thin. A gust and everything fell apart. Then his health began to take its toll. The back pain he had ignored for years worsened. There was no one to remind him to eat better or take his medication. Eventually, he was quietly removed from the company directory. There were concerns about personal credit. It turned out all those years of using me as a guarantor, mixing personal and business accounts, caught up with him. That only worked while he wore the badge of stable home, supportive wife. Now even the courts wouldn't accept him. Why would the board? He tried to turn to Samantha for help, but Samantha had her own problems. After losing her job, she launched a women's empowerment coaching service, teaching others how to live with confidence and independence. The irony? She had never discovered it herself. Her ex got engaged a week after she left him. She fell apart, recorded a video with tears in her eyes, and posted it online. But her sad story wasn't about a lost love. It was about me. How could my mother abandon me like this? No one bought it. There were 2 types of comments. One group said, Your mom didn't abandon you, she finally chose herself. The other? Anonymous users reposted my photo. The picture of me under the Aurora Borealis in Iceland, coat hood up, captioned, This woman didn't run away. She returned home to herself. Someone liked that comment. It was me. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't open Thatch's new emails. They no longer deserved my time. What united them now? A joint legal bill. I turned that story into a podcast episode and sent it to a show about women's reinvention after retirement. The host closed the episode. She is meant to shine. It got more listens than I expected. 30-some standout comments. I made my daughter hear me. She didn't say a word. I cried not from sadness. I also wanted to try. She didn't vanish. She simply came back to herself. That spring, I walked the forest trails on the western edge of town. Sneakers on, water bottle in hand, chatting with a group of local volunteers. Halfway through, a woman took my arm and asked, "Are you Amanda? I heard your story. You really did it. You did what we were all afraid to do." I held her hand for a moment. I said nothing, because in that moment I realized I wasn't the woman who ran out of the kitchen sobbing and begging for her freedom. I was the woman who walked out, stood tall, smiled wide, and I had the strength to help someone else take the first step. I'm Bess, Amanda's mother. The day Samantha and Zach came to my door, it was bitterly cold. I stood right in the threshold watching them with their overly polite smiles and eyes that kept glancing toward the same corner of my living room. They didn't ask to come in, and I didn't invite them. I wasn't interested in another rehearsed speech about concern or family unity. What I did notice was how their gazes kept drifting toward that old filing cabinet in the corner, the one that held decades of records, receipts, and documents about Amanda. They weren't there to check on anyone's well-being. They were there to check the accounts, and I saw right through them. I've never been a fool. I remember the first time Amanda brought Zach home. They were newly engaged, still wrapped in the soft confusion of early engagement. They sat on the small balcony by the kitchen, and I brought out a cake I had baked that morning. Amanda beamed and said, "Zach is very sound, responsible, family-oriented, but I saw something different." Zach smiled at Amanda a lot, not so much at me. He was pleasant, yes, but distant, refined, not sincere. During dinner, he spoke of his goals, ambitions, and long hours, but not once did he mention responsibility. Not once did he say what he would give Amanda, only what he expected from her. "She's so quiet, she understands me," he said. It was said like praise, but I read the message clearly. Easy to manage. He was attentive with her, performatively so. With me, not a single full thank you. When dinner ended and I began clearing plates, he didn't even look at me. In that moment, I knew. This man might please my daughter, might even enjoy her company, but he didn't respect her, and certainly he didn't respect her family. Still, I said nothing, because it wasn't my place to decide for her. My role was not to block her way, but to make sure she always had a way back. A safe place to land if the path she chose went awry. And that's what I did all these years. I watched. Calm, patient, enduring. I watched her swallow every disappointment, every indignity, every heavy silence at dinner when her opinion wasn't asked, and her work wasn't acknowledged. I watched her live the version of marriage I knew well. And now, all these years later, I see in her stance the same shadows I once carried. But this time the story will end differently. Because this time I'm not just the woman in the background preparing and smoothing clothes. I'm the one who stands in the door, keeping out the people who never saw her as anything more than an extension of what they could take. The year Amanda married, I gave her the wedding dress and the jewelry. She stood there, veil on, crying like a little girl, clutching my hand and saying, "Mom, I'm going to have a good life." I cried too, not because she was leaving, but because in the back of my mind I already heard a small whisper. She is going to suffer, sooner or later. After she moved in with Zach, I offered to pop by to help with the baby and the meals. Amanda had just given birth. She was exhausted, barely able to finish a sentence without falling asleep. Zach was polite to me, apparently, but his courtesy always had a certain undertone, like I was a guest to be taken advantage of. I recall once at dinner I casually remarked that Samantha's cough might improve if you put a warm compress on her at night. Zach, without even looking up, responded bluntly, "It always passes. No need to worry." Another time Amanda told me she was thinking of looking for a part-time job. Before she could finish, Zach interrupted. "Your body isn't what it used to be. Wouldn't it be better for you to stay home and rest?" Then there was the night he joked at dinner. "Isn't it natural for Bess to help with the baby? She's not working." He laughed as if it were nothing. But to my ears it was lead. I said nothing because I knew exactly what I saw. Not a careless man with poor words, but a man skilled at control. A moment I will never forget. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes. Samantha ran in crying and asking for chocolate. I said gently, "You can have it after dinner." She shouted at me, "Why should I listen to you? Dad says you're just the help." Amanda heard it. I saw her expression freeze, but all she did was move closer and whisper, "Mom, I'm sorry. I'll talk to her. She didn't mean it." And that broke my heart. Not the child's words, but how my daughter had learned to apologize for everyone but herself, how she had learned to carry the weight of others' behavior as if it were her own. She never raised her voice at Zach. She never challenged his parents. She swallowed pain, smiled despite suffering, and treated injustice like part of the marital contract. Zach never washed the dishes, never changed a nappy. On the rare occasions he picked up a broom, he was hailed as the perfect husband. Amanda, meanwhile, became the unpaid work of the household. No holidays, no compensation, no recognition. One night I got up for a glass of water and heard them through the half-open bedroom door. Zach yelled, "God, can you stop emotionally blackmailing me for once? Just because your mother is here you think you can act out?" I stood there, hand trembling. My daughter had become his punching bag and didn't even have the right to protest. I lay awake all night in the living room, fearful that in the morning she'd smile as if nothing had happened. Some nights when I couldn't sleep in the guest room, I took out my diary and wrote. The first page read, "My daughter has forgotten that she too deserves to be loved." I kept writing, day after day, not to build a case, not to start a war, but to remind myself, one day she will wake up. And when she does, I have to be the one to tell her, "You're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're simply finally happily awake." That day when Amanda called me, her voice wasn't the usual one. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just said quietly, "Mom, I'm not coming home for Christmas. I'm going on a trip." I was silent for a moment, and then replied, "That's fine. A trip might be good." Then I hung up. That night I sat alone in the living room, fingers clutched around the old teacup I had used for more than a decade. But my hands were cold as if holding a stone. I knew what she meant by trip. It wasn't a holiday. It was an escape. I had seen Zach and Samantha's true nature for years. That call from Amanda wasn't a plea. It was permission to finally let go. I stayed awake the whole night and took out the black leather accounting book hidden under my bed. It held records of the money I had quietly saved after selling our old family home. I told myself it was for emergencies, for my old age. But now I realized it had been there for a purpose. Amanda didn't need it to survive. She needed it to leave. It wasn't about skill. She could earn her own money. What she needed was a launching pad, something that was hers, completely hers. The next morning I went to the bank. The clerk asked, "Would you like to include a note with the transfer?" I said yes. Right. For my daughter's life. Non-refundable. That was the moment I understood. What I'd been waiting for all these years wasn't for Amanda to change. It was for me to stop pretending I didn't see what was happening. To stop being the quiet mother who always stands on the sidelines. That night I wrote another line in my diary. She said she wouldn't be home, but I knew she had finally started to walk her own path. It wouldn't be easy, but at least it would be hers. I closed the pen and turned off the light. It was dark outside, but I felt calm. How did I know? I had given her the safety net she would never ask for but always deserved. 3 days after Amanda left the country, Zach and Samantha appeared again at my door. It had just rained. The air still smelled of wet, rich earth. They stood there with smiles too wide to be real. "Grandma, we just wanted to see how you were," Samantha said brightly, pulling out a box of perfectly packaged cinnamon rolls. "Your favorites." I didn't take them. I simply stepped aside and let them in. Not because I'd softened, because I wanted to hear exactly what game they were playing. Just in time, when the box was on the table, Zach cleared his throat and said what had been on his tongue the whole time. "See, we heard Amanda's doing well. You're going on a trip, huh?" Samantha jumped in quickly. "Yes." She posted that picture of the aurora. "Impressive. Even my friends were jealous." I said nothing. I only served them a glass of water each. I watched them exchange looks, as if deciding who would say it. Finally, Zach cleared his throat and said the words he'd been holding in. "See? We heard you sold your old house recently, so... Well, did Amanda get the funds?" I put down my cup and looked him in the eye. "Who told you that?" Zach let out an embarrassed chuckle. "Oh, nothing major. Just something I heard. We thought maybe Amanda was under a lot of pressure managing it alone, so we wondered if..." "If what?" I interrupted. "If perhaps," Samantha said, leaning in with a smile, "we could help her manage it. We're younger and understand investments better. We could help stretch her finances." I smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was thin, like the first layer of ice on a winter pond. Clear, delicate, and sharp enough to cut. "You both know I gave that money to her, don't you?" I said slowly. They looked at each other, suddenly unsure. "Do you think I'm an old fool who hands over money when someone cries and nods when someone smiles? My daughter earned that money, she survived. Neither of you will touch a cent." Thatch's smile faded. His mouth twisted as if he still wanted to recover the conversation. "See, this is just a misunderstanding. No. I said coldly. There is no No, I said coldly. There is no misunderstanding. I heard how you treated my daughter. How you squandered her. How you spent her money and yet had the gall to scold her like a child. Did I hear you say your mother is here, so stop acting out? Did you think I didn't hear that? Yes. Samantha sprang up and slammed her hand on the table. Try to sabotage our marriage. My mother never said anything bad about you. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course she didn't. She protected you, but I didn't. Now I only protect her. I walked to the door and opened it. I've said what I came to say. You will not touch that money. And if either of you shows up again, I'll call the police. Don't assume age means weakness. I know perfectly well what I'm capable of. They stood frozen in the doorway, stunned. Zach was the first to turn, jaw clenched. Samantha shot me a withering look that could have started a fire and then followed him. I closed the door, and when the latch clicked into place, I exhaled long, slow, steady. I worried Amanda might be dragged back. She's always been gentle, always ready to give in, to make last-minute compromises. But after that conversation we had in her study, I saw it. She had changed, no longer the woman she had been. A few days later, I sneaked into her hearing. I sat in the back row, hidden behind a column, watching her in a perfect suit standing at the plaintiff's table. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. When Zach's lawyer tried to twist facts, ask confusing questions, and corner her, Amanda responded clearly and calmly. Her voice was firm, her gaze steady. She was no longer the woman who swallowed pain. She was something else now, like a sword slowly being honed year after year of silence. And that day, in front of everyone, she finally raised it. And she freed herself. My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, of pride. After the hearing, I sat outside on a cold metal bench for 30 minutes, letting the wind lash my face. I realized I hadn't been waiting for her to win the case. I had been waiting for her to win on her own, without apology, without shrinking. That night, she sent me a voice message. You could hear wind in the background as she said softly, "Mom, don't worry about me. I'm okay." I stared at that message for a long time. I smiled despite the ache in my chest. The next morning, I walked to the town elder center. It was a place I'd passed 100 times but never gone in. I always told myself I had to stay home in case Amanda needed me. But now I knew. I didn't need to be a mother waiting behind the scenes. She had become her own safety net. It was time for me to have a life too. I signed up for a pottery class and a community memoir reading group. The first day, the teacher asked us each to write a line that defined us. I wrote, "The decision I'm most proud of in life wasn't giving birth to my daughter. It was supporting her." After class, a woman approached and gently touched my arm. "That line, who is it for?" she asked. "My daughter," I replied. She nodded. "She must be extraordinary." I smiled. "She is. Truly she is." That night, I slept soundly. I didn't wake in the middle of the night. I didn't dream of all those dinners where I swallowed silence and rage. Amanda no longer needs me to step in. And I'm finally learning to step out. I wasn't her escape route. I was the force that pushed her when she needed it most. Now she walks with strength of her own, so I will turn and walk toward a life that is finally mine. Spring has arrived. The flowers in my garden have begun to bloom. I made a cup of tea and sent her a message. "Darling, I'm fine too. Don't look back. Keep going. I'll always be behind you." This was the second part of my story. If you want to know the rest, subscribe below and follow the channel Curious Stories.